is what it is, right? But in the morning, you may have to actually put your code in to get on your desktop, for example, but I'm not sure how that's going to play out. So we're testing those, testing some software and looking at some options for that. But that was one of the things they said that we need to do a better job. And let's see, that was pretty much it. Policies, okay, was the other thing. So unfortunately, I'll just tell myself I'm not a great policy person. I'm a guy that likes to get the things done and worry and do the work and make sure the things. I'm not big on doing paperwork to say that I'm doing the things that I'm doing, right? And so unfortunately, they give you a hard time if you're not documenting this and all that. This is what you say you're going to do, and this is what you actually do. I'm more about the doing than saying what I'm going to do, right? So, but again, that's they're going to ding on that. So we've got to work on policies and multi-factor and vulnerability management. So one of the things you two are going to see in the next budget coming up is some more funding put in to kind of accommodate those problems. Unfortunately, like I said, everything it's talking about, it ultimately costs money to do, right? So you're going to see that in the next budget cycle, and I'll talk more about that. But ultimately, we did fairly well, like I said, and so they commented, that we were, of all the organizations they've done, which they hadn't done a whole lot, we had probably one of the better ones that they've seen. So, like I said, I think it was overall it was very, very, very positive. The judge and the city manager both sat in on the presentation from them. We did a joint because, for those of you that are new, we are the only city county in the entire state that does what we do. That we have a joint IT fund, joint IT operation. So it's very unique. But in that case, for example, they were able to come in and do one audit and audit both organizations at the same time. And like I said, for those of you who don't know, we provide all those services. You guys are actually connected to us. We have 2 firewalls. Those firewalls are actually in what they call HA cluster, high availability cluster. So if our firewall fails, the internet for the city comes through y'all's pipe, and if yours fails, your internet comes through our pipe. So we leverage all of this association to make, otherwise you wouldn't have that, and we wouldn't have that independently of one another. So like I said, it's very beneficial, this joint operation that we do. And this was another case of that. Like I said, they were able to do one audit and basically service both organizations, have one meeting and accommodate that. So they were like, they almost didn't know how to handle that. They were like, we're used to having to go to the county and having to deal with, a different scenarios. They were also very pleased and surprised at how well Garland County has done embracing a individual IT department. And, those of you that have been around for a long time know that in 2009, when I started, there was, I think, at least 4 different IT folks for the county. And so if you weren't aware, a big chunk of the county was one consultant, and then there was 2 or 3 other consultants dealing with the other portions. And so we were able to bring all that back under one roof and basically have a single point of control and influence on that. So those are, like I said, they were very surprised by that as well for all the counties that dealt with. So they were very, like I said, they were very high, giving you guys high praise for the work that you guys have done to work together on that. So that was all positive. The only other thing that budget-wise that I would, these were all budget things as well as audit things, but I'll sort of kind of transition into that. Is VMware. So whether you knew it or not, and a lot of you do know it, all of our servers for the county and for the city both run in data centers. And so down in the data center for the county, primary one is actually down in the basement. And we used to, when we first started back in the day, we had, a server for this department, a server for this department, a server for this department, and all a bunch of different physical machines. And the technology's changed and those became virtualized. And I won't, a lot of you have heard this before, but for those of you who are new, I won't go into that because it will bore you to death. But ultimately, what it means is that we consolidated things. And so over time, we used a piece of software called VMware to do that. Well, a couple of years ago, they got bought out by a different company. And so the company that bought them changed all the rules that we were working under and basically just totally screwed us up on how we leverage their software and how we use their software and how much it costs. And so we typically, the softwares that we buy, we typically maintain. So we pay an annual amount to keep the upgrades coming, to get support, and many of them require that. To be honest with you, you can't actually use their software. If you stop paying the maintenance on the software actually stops working. But ultimately, this software doesn't. And so we were able to, a couple of years ago, we said, we can't, this is not sustainable. We've got to come up with a different plan. And so we basically quit paying the maintenance a couple of years ago, and have been kind of flying by the seat of our pants. We had basically upgraded everything to the highest level they offered and said, we know that's sustainable for a period of time. And so we did that. And so we finally figured out we would have rearranged some things that we were doing and basically kind of redesigned some of the things that we were doing. And then they actually kind of backed up a little bit on what they said. And so long story short is they got the cost back down to where it's close to what we used to pay. It is more than what we were paying before, but we haven't paid that for the last couple of years, but now it's going to come back. And it's a $30,000 purchase. So like I said, it's going to be a decent increase in one of my budget lines. But ultimately, that along with the Qualis and the which is the vulnerability management, and then the MFA, which is from a company called Duo, are things that you're going to see in the budget that's coming forward. The other thing that's worth mentioning to all these folks' budgets that's related to IT is Windows 10. For those of you who didn't know, is end of life, and basically this October, Microsoft's going to quit supporting it. So if you have Windows 10 or less, then basically you're running an operating system on your computer that is no longer going to get patches. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you don't get a patch, potentially you can click on a thing, and that thing then has the window to attach you. And so patch management, and I'll kind of go back to that for a second. But one of the audits, this sheet here was Arkansas leg audit, Garland County 2025, initial 1-year standard recommendation for the Cyber Response Board, which the Cyber Response Board was enacted by this Act 46. And there's 5 criteria on here. Number 1 is MFA, 2 is maintain, test offline backups, data backups, 3 is implement cybersecurity awareness training program. Those of you that are listening to this all know what we're doing and not doing, but for those of you who don't, adhere to ACR8 ACRB password standard, and then they adhere to ACRB patch management standard. Well, going through those, we talked about MFA. We test our backups. I think it's either quarterly or I'm pretty sure it's quarterly. We basically take, and like I said, for those of you that are new, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself for the people that have been here forever, but we do actually a disk to tape to cloud backup scenario. So everything that's on those servers and some different areas is backed up to a physical box, a physical server with a bunch of hard drive in it. And then that machine has, and we have redundancy about that. So that's not just one of those. There's one at my office, one at your office, one out anyway. Those exist in several places. So we have, all this has redundancy as well, but ultimately it's backed up to that hard drive. And then that computer has a tape drive to it. So as crazy as that sounds, which for those of you that aren't IT, if you tell somebody you're still using tape, they look at you like you're crazy. But that they call that what's called an air gap solution. So if you put it on a tape, the tape drive actually comes out of the machine and goes into a vault. Well, that means that the attackers can't get to that tape, right? So that's a true air gap backup that they can't get to, and that's what everybody says ultimately is the best scenario. So we still do that, and because it's not super expensive, and we've been able to find ways to make that affordable, we've kept doing it. And then we have added in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years a cloud option to that. So now we actually push all that backup data to a company in the cloud as well. So again, we leverage all of those scenarios in the hopes that if we do have some kind of ransomware or some kind of cyber attack, that we can get that data back somewhere. Now, ultimately, can they get to all those things? Potentially, because even the tape, people, well, I can't get to the tape. Well, they could have attacked you prior to you making the backup, and then what you backed up is on the tape, and then when you restore the tape, it comes back in the tape, right? So there ultimately is no way, and I've told this group and other groups, the report stuff, there's no way we can 100% protect ourselves. I tell everybody all the time, if they can get to DOD, Department of Defense, they can ultimately get to us, because they're spending a whole lot more money than we are and have a whole lot more manpower resources than we do, obviously. But what we try to do is do all the things that we can do to make ourselves the least optimal target, right? And one of these things which has helped a ton, I think, is this number 3, which is implement cybersecurity awareness. And for those of you who don't know, we use a Nova4 product, which basically sends periodic phishing tests. So all the employees get these test emails, and they have the opportunity to click on it or to delete it or do whatever. And this software pays attention to what they do and then reports that back. And so, for example, every month I get a report, and we average 3%, 4%, 5% click rates. Well, out of 400 or 500 people, that still means that 5 or 6, 10 people or whatever are clicking on those fish tests, which is, it only takes one, right? It literally only takes one. So we still every month could potentially get attacked based on that test. But before we started doing, when we implemented the cyber awareness training, which is probably 6, 7, 8 years ago, whatever it was. Sorry, I throw times and dates out. He's recording me here, and if you fact check all these things, you're going to find out that my memory is not that great. So ultimately, I don't know for sure how long ago it was, but it was a while back. And what we had back then was 30, 40, 50% click rates, because people just didn't understand that you can't do this. And so what this software does is it also disciplines them. It's a carrot and stick. It disciplines them and makes them take additional training if they click. So it has basically a check and balance for fish tests. The other thing that it does do is on a monthly basis, you get the employees get a 3 to 5 minute video, cybersecurity awareness video, and it's the take rate on that's about 60%. So 6 out of 10 employees are watching it, whether they're starting it and going and doing something else, because you can start the video and go do other work and it'll still run through that. I don't know. I assume they're not, because I don't know why you would do that, right? You could just avoid it like the other 40% of the people are doing. It's not something that we enforce. It's not something that we make them do, but ultimately it's just another tool for us to help try to protect ourselves. But that's number 3 on their list. And like I said, it's super important. It's something that we're already doing. The 4th one was password standards. I won't go over those because we're already doing them all. One thing that they did recommend was 12 character long passwords. So I don't know how we all feel about that, but I hate passwords as it is. It's one of the biggest pains for us. We get 5 to 10 calls a day probably of people locked out because of their passwords. So it's already a problematic issue for us. But ultimately, they do recommend that. So that's one thing we might consider in the future. Right now we have 8, which is their minimum is their recommendation is 8. And then the last thing is patch management, which we already do. So we spent a bunch of money on software that basically every week looks at all the desktops, scans the desktop, says you have the software that you need to stay current and active. And if you don't, then I'm going to give it to you. And it forces them to accept the software and actually reboots the machine if they don't accept it. So we've been doing that again for years. So none of these things are new to us or something that we haven't been doing. But back to the budget issue, along that same line was where I was talking about. Started that was patch management. So Windows 10 is going to stop being patched in October. So again, those of you that are new and those of you who've been here a while know, the last 2 years we've made a concerted effort to try to. Actually, maybe started 3 years ago, because they told us this was going to happen, and so it hasn't been a crisis situation for us. It's been a slow evolution, and we're down to the last handful of machines to meet that October deadline. And that's it's a pretty considerable feat, considering we've got, I think it's again, the numbers, I'm gonna lie to you because I get the city and the county and all that. That's 400, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 machines around the county. And so to have all of those up to that level is taking us, a lot of effort and a lot of cooperation from all the departments to do that. Because ultimately it's their budgets that get impacted by that. And it's an unfortunate scenario that Microsoft puts on us, but they've done it with XP, they've done it with Windows 10, they're going to do it with Windows 11, they're going to do it with all the operating systems. So we just have to keep, and that's one of the things you'll see is we give all the departments an annual report showing the assessment of their desktops. And we have a recommended 4-year replacement cycle. We vary that replacement cycle based on kind of how well the economy is doing, to be honest with you. If revenue's down, we back in the past when things were kind of bad and budgets were much tighter, we went to a 5-year cycle. So we kind of vary that depending upon what we think the budgets can afford. I think we're on a 4-year now, I believe. Is that right? Everybody shaking their hand. And so we recommend that they replace them every 4 years, but ultimately tell them that if their machine is still functioning well at 4 years, they can go 5 years, they can go 6 years. We have, I was talking to somebody and there's a counting machine that's 12 years old that's still functioning on somebody's desk. And so we don't push that issue as long as it has a current operating system, which this one had Windows 10. You click on it and wait a couple seconds, and this person was okay with that. So ultimately we let them kind of control their own destiny with that, but we do give them a recommended cycle. And because of that, they've done a good job of kind of adhering to that to some extent. And so we don't end up having, we get to a point where Windows 10 goes away and we got to replace 400 machines at once. So they will come to you every year and replace a current, relatively decent amount of machines. And there are reasons, like I said, it's not just because they want new machines, because ultimately if you don't, you'll get yourself into a big bind. I have had, and it was the city police department, but I had them, they ended up having to buy like 60 or 70 computers one time. This was 10, 15 years ago, because they got themselves into a corner where they basically had no choice but to upgrade, and they had not done a good job of doing regular replacements. So that's the Windows 10 issue. The other issue, and that has affected their budgets, but shouldn't affect their budgets much anymore. But in that same parallel is Office 2019, Office 2016 and 2019. So you're going to see them come forward with budget proposals for that. Microsoft has discontinued support for those two Office products as of this October. I don't see that as critical as the operating system, which is what the Windows 10 problem was, because that's core to the computer. And so I don't see them targeting those. I see them targeting operating systems much more than I do the software, Office software. So we're really not forcing the issue, but we've encouraged them over the last couple of years to get rid of 16 and move forward with that. Obviously 16, we're in 25, right? So you can do the math and that they've had it for a while. But you get your money's worth that way. And so unfortunately for us, again, we can't control our own destiny. And so Microsoft has increased the turnover cycle on their products. And so now the end of life used to be like 6-7 years, and now this end of life are turning out to be like 3 years. They're trying to force everybody off of the desktop versions of the software and get us to use the subscription model, which we do use a subscription model as well. So not a good portion of the county folks and city folks use it's called MS365, Office 365, they're called different things, but basically it's the subscription model of the same type of, you can get the software and download it for free because you're paying a subscription rather than buying a copy of the software and keeping it for a while. That's called the perpetual model. We still leverage both, because if it makes sense and you can benefit from the subscription in other ways besides just the Office software, we encourage that. And to be honest with you, we're going in that direction, one, because Microsoft's forcing us that direction. I think 10 years from now, they won't even offer professional software. You're going to have a subscription. And so again, if we made that leap, we'd go from zero budget to $150,000 a year, countywide. And so we've inched that up. And I think that number is in the $30,000 to $40,000 range now is what the subscription costs per year. But one caveat to that is one of the big things that we replaced with that, and what we initially started using the subscription models for, was to replace just email functionality. We used to have an on-premise email exchange server, they called it, and that had an annualized cost, and so we replaced some of that $30,000 of that. So that wasn't all just this Office that we're talking about. But anyway, long story short, it's an expensive proposition to go all in. So we've tried to ease ourselves in. And like I said, we talked from the Office 2016, that's cost $300. And if you annualize that out, we've got pretty good return for our money, versus the subscription model accelerates that to like literally every 3 years. It's probably more like 2 to 2.5 years. You would have to replace your Office software to make it kind of equivalent. So we're not encouraging that, but ultimately, the other thing that comes with the subscription model, which many of you are aware of, and something that we are working on, is moving a lot of our file storage and stuff off premise into the cloud. And why would you do that? Well, we've got a server downstairs, and that server has to be replaced every so often, and it takes us a bunch of disks, and all those servers downstairs. I think last replacement cycle were about, I'm gonna lie to you, but in the $100,000 range. And we've kept those. I think the last time we replaced them was a couple years ago, and they've lasted us about 6 or 7 years in the past. And I told the Quorum when we replaced the ones downstairs that I hope that might be the last time we do it. But hopefully, if not, we'll get 6 or 7 years out of them. And like I said, we're already a year or two into that cycle now. And so, because it goes by so quick. But ultimately, the more stuff that everything's going to the cloud. I mean, ultimately, all the software vendors that we're dealing with are changing their softwares from on-premise to being software that's installed locally to stuff that you use in the web. And so that's, ultimately in 10 years, I see that as probably being where we're all at anyway. And so that moving the files into the cloud kind of goes in conjunction with that. The other huge benefit to moving the files in the cloud, huge benefits are related to disaster recovery. They're related to work from home. They're related to work from anywhere. Your files, when you get on your computer at work, your files are there. When you get on here, your files are there. No matter where you go, your files are always available to you. And so it disconnects us from being tied to that computer at the office. And so that's the way of the future as well. Through COVID and some of the other problems that we've had, obviously we've learned that being able to work from home and remote work is a good deal, because ultimately you can't control if we had some kind of disaster before in that situation. So one of the positive things about all that is it kind of helped move that forward some. Because from a DR standpoint, it's always been a concern of mine. All your stuff is in this file and it gets hit by a tornado, then we're in deep trouble, right? Even if we have everything backed up, where's all the infrastructure? So you got to replace all those computers, all those servers, and you're talking months, weeks, to get back to where you can actually restore that piece of tape that has all your data on it, right? So with online storage, that becomes less of a point. But so those are items that are going to come up. Another thing that's going to come up related to Windows 10 that I didn't mention was we replaced all the internal machines, but we do have external machines, laptops. We have different devices that people are using. So we haven't forced that issue, but we need to continue that, moving that forward, right? Because ultimately those machines, while they're not as big a risk because they're not on our network, they are still somewhat of a risk, because I assume you're using email or you're using some kind of resource on there that potentially could come back to the internal resource, right? So we do have to continue. We can't just say, okay, they're external, so we're going to forget about those. So we're going to pivot from focusing on the internal to start giving you guys a little bit of a hard time about the external machines. But that's not a big focus this year. The other thing that came up that a lot of the folks here in the room we mentioned was switches. So the way all this stuff is interconnected is through a thing called a switch, whether you know it or not, which is kind of a fancy word for a splitter. The network signal the internet comes into that and then goes out 24 ways or 48 ways, and everybody comes in from those 48 ways and goes out that one way. So it kind of divides the signal up. So those are all over the county, right? We have I want to say like 50 or 60 switches countywide. Several departments are going to get, they're going to be bringing budget items forward to you, asking for money for those because they're, again, like everything else, they're software driven. And so the software in them, the company decides that we're going to discontinue that model, and they force you basically to get a new model to continue to get the updates and security patches and so on and so forth. So that's the budget items I have for. That's the audits. That's really all I had to discuss. I know it was a lot. We haven't had a meeting in a while. Sorry, but usually we go pretty quick on these. But so that's all I have, and I would open it up for any questions for me.
I have some questions.
Sure.
What's the difference in the function with the license and the way we do it now and doing the subscription as far as what we would see and how it works? Because Patrick and I have already talked about this because we're having to replace several.
Sure.
And he has asked us to do two, like me and one other.
Sure.
To test it, to kind of see what it looks like and how it works.
Sure.
I just wondered how much different is it between what we're doing now and what it will.
So we buy 3 licenses currently. Okay. So we started with several years ago was called an EOP1, which is basically that exchange license, that mail license. That mail license cost us, I believe it's around $50. I'm around all these numbers, $50 per user per year.
Yeah, and I'm already on the.
That's right. That's what everybody started with. Yeah. Literally everybody that had almost all of 400 people, 500 people, whatever, have those EOP have those EOP1s. Now, what we started several years ago doing was deploying. There's 2 other licenses: is the G1 and the G3. Okay, the G1 is about $100 per user per year, so it doubles that cost. But it comes with the online storage. The Exchange Online does not come with any online storage. So the big advantage of the G1 over what we had is online storage. So we're going to move your files, your department's files, up to the cloud, and you guys are all going to have G1s. You're going to pay an additional $50 per user per year, and your stuff is going to go from downstairs to up in the cloud, and you're going to have that access to everywhere.
Will it look different, like see what I'm looking at?
Not really. It kind of will, because so what's interesting is you're used to using File Explorer, right? So you use the yellow folder, the File Explorer, and you copy and paste, you do all that kind of stuff. Well, instead of using File Explorer, you use a browser. So you use Edge, you use Chrome, whatever. But in Chrome and Edge, it's still yellow folders. You still copy and paste. Everybody here knows that dragging stuff around in the browser is a little different than dragging stuff around on your desktop. So some of that is a little more painful and not as easy.
Because I'm a desktop person.
That's right. Yeah, and so, but 10 years from now, there's going to be no desktop people, right? So you can get on the bus, you can get run over by the bus, but you're going to, like, one way or the other, the bus is coming. So but ultimately, so that's what we're trying to do is ease our way into that. But ultimately, it is so the other advantage of a G1. So G1 also offers web-based apps. Okay, so you can use Excel, Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, or primary office products that you guys use. Those are all available to you with a G1 license as well. It provides you those. The EOP1 does not. Okay, and so with the G1 you get all those. So you have a Word that you can use with the G1. It's not the Word that you are normally used to install on your machine, right? So people use Word, for example, in different ways. They open Word, they go to files, and they open my file and open it down. Or other people use File Explorer and they go to their My Documents folder, they find their Word document, double click on it, it opens Word. Okay, so that's 2 kind of mechanisms. Well, if you're the kind that uses Word to go find your document, when it's online, it's not that much different. Okay, now how you open it in a browser, it's still not that much different. You double click an icon, the icon opens a browser that has Word in it. Otherwise, if you're thumbprint, you double click the Word icon, the Word opens, right? So that part is not different, but how the files move with one or the other is a little bit different, and there is some growing pain associated with that. I'm not going to kid you. Even for me, always, it's like, so I'm like, dang it, I don't like, I got to download a file from the browser, and then I got to use it over here, and then I got to upload it to the browser. It's actually more painful having both. Being in this transition period, if you're all in, it's actually not that painful because you go to the Edge window, you got the yellow folder, you click on the thing, it opens the Word for you the same, or you open the Word, you go to the thing, find the document, open it. But you got to all be in the web, right? So if you're all in the web, that's fine. And that's where we want to get you to. Because the third option is G3s. And so what does G3 give you over G1? Well, it gives you some more storage and some other things. But the big thing that it gives you, and the reason that we most buy it for folks, is it gives you a copy of Office that you can download and install still. So we don't have the $300 license we're buying anymore, but we buy the G3, which costs $250 a year. And so for that extra $150 times 3, $450 every 3 years, it's the same as buying a copy of Office for every 3 years for $300 and something bucks. So it's not quite equitable right now. So I don't encourage people to go to G3s necessarily unless they have reasons. But one interesting thing is, if you get to G3s, like I said, I'm not going to argue that with people. If you've got a small department, only a few folks, G3s aren't that big of a transition versus the G1s. But ultimately, what I see us potentially doing is a lot of people getting G3s, and we've actually, so whether you guys knew it or not, we have encouraged every new employee that you've hired to quit using on-prem Office, quit using on-prem Outlook, and said, please use the web versions. So we're trying to help you help yourselves. And so ultimately, I think, 10 years from now, the workforce that you have will ultimately already be there. And so we may go to G3s and then back up to G1s. But that's the difference in the 3 licenses. Does that make sense? And if we can get our goal is to get everybody in the county and everybody in the city to a G1. That's what our goal is. And for everybody to use web versions of Office. And I force my folks, so I have 10 employees between city and county, and I force my folks to live with what we're trying to get you to do. So we have already done what I'm talking about. So everybody, almost every in my department, I'm actually using on-prem Office still, but there are reasons. So, and there will be reasons for you as well. If the web version of Word or PowerPoint may not do, or Excel may not do the thing that you do on-prem because they aren't one-to-one copies. So if you use pivot tables, for example, some of you know what pivot tables are. They don't work well in the web version of Excel, but they work fine in on-prem. So if you do some of these different things, and I have things in Outlook that I use, so I'm still using the on-prem version of Outlook. I could get away with Word and Excel and all the other ones online, and I actually go back and forth. I use the web version of Excel a lot of times, then I use the on-prem version, and I go back and forth. But ultimately, most of the folks in IS, when you talk to them, are using the G1. We actually have gotten rid of. We went to G3s, and we backed up now to G1s, doing exactly what I'm talking to you about. And so, I feel like if we can do it, ultimately you guys can do it as well. There is some growing pains. So, but slowly but surely, we're not trying to get the whole county to go. We're not trying to get the whole city to go. We're going basically kind of one department at a time to try to ease the pain. And the people that are willing are moving forward. So, anything else?
Do you know how many departments you have now that you've already transitioned that into? Or how many computers?
To cloud only? I think the answer is I don't have departments that are a total like 20, 15 or 20. You count them all, and I think the answer is 3 or 4 or 5. It's a small handful that have transitioned over, and it's the same with the city. So, like I said, but I see this as a 10-year project. I really do. It's not. So I'm not displeased with the progress that we've made, and we actually are learning too. We're learning all the, this is when we do this, we break this thing. You know what I'm saying? And so we wouldn't want to do it any faster because ultimately it does take. We don't realize that it's going to have this outcome when we do it. And then as we do one other department, they have a different scenario. That's the interesting thing about city and county government that a lot of people don't understand is, what this person's doing is not the same thing as this person's doing. The applications that this person's using is not nowhere like the applications this person's using. And you can't, one size does not fit all. And so you can't really, you think you understand it until you get into that scenario where this one difference makes a big difference. And so we learned to live with that a lot. So
are you doing one department at a time, or you're trying to transition just as the new people come in?
Well, we're trying to transition every new person, and then we're doing one department at a time or a couple at a time, to be honest with you. So we're using that in, but and what you two will learn in these folks here that have been here know, we don't make anybody do anything. I don't ultimately tell any of these people, I work for y'all. We work for y'all, and ultimately we're at your will. I'll tell you strongly, I suggest this, but ultimately if you say, no, I don't want to do that, no, I'm not going to do that, then again, we submit. So at the city and the county both, because I see us as we're a service department, so we provide service even to the city, to those folks. And so we ultimately can't tell you, you guys are the run of the business. And so we just try to give you the best advice possible, and, hope you don't fall off too many cliffs without us. And we do every once in a while, and we do ourselves. So. Any questions? Concerns? It's funny, we started having these meetings back in 2009, and at first it was kind of a beat up session for me. And we haven't had one in a while, and usually what that indicates to me is that we're doing good. Because what the real intent for this was for these folks to come and tell us what we need to do better, or how we can do better, or what we need to do to improve, or things that they're struggling with, or things that they're having issues with. So it's been a pleasure working for you guys, and like I said, the joint thing has been very beneficial to both entities. So appreciate you guys working with us so well.
It's a great job. So has all of that helped in, I know there were a couple of gap areas at one point in time where the signals weren't as strong, and different things, like at Lakeside, they had one or two areas that kind of missed out on some things.
I think what you're talking about is radio. And so we don't do radio.
So it was the radio?
Yeah, it's the handheld radio, or the car mounted radio system that I think is what you're talking about. And that's my familiar this was little, but I understand that they're continuing to work on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I know the county's spent millions and the city spent millions on radio systems to try to rectify. Again, I think that goes back to Motorola got rid of a bunch of equipment, or was end of life, and we had a bunch of equipment that was way past life, and so we had to replace a bunch of stuff, and then we had to consider going with A-Winds, and that's the state system, and partnering with them. And
so it had nothing to do with the IT at all?
no, man, I've like I said, I've dabbled a little bit in that stuff just because there's a little bit of crossover, but not too much. It's funny, we dabble in everything, literally, but not those big decisions and those complicated decisions that came, because they're still struggling with that, I believe. Yeah, around some of those.
Still that little.
Let's add a tower that cost $1 million. That's its problem.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's just money, they'll solve the problem, but those were some big money problems that they were addressing with those. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we live in a great place to live, but it's not a great place for technology. It's like fiber, we don't have the greatest fiber around because you can't dig a ditch around without hitting a rock, right? So it's everything's challenging here in Hot Springs. So if you go to other places of the state, the cities and counties have way better, way faster internet capabilities than we have, far cheaper. And we don't have this much selection. And I will say that we've been using Ritter for the last 4, 5, 6 years, as it is, and it's worked well for us. Is everybody still okay? Still happy with internet? We were using AT&T prior to that, and our cost went way down, and our performance went up, and our reliability's been good. I mean, one thing I like about AT&T is they're very reliable. Their service typically is very reliable, but their customer service and their cost has never been great for us. And so switching to Ritter was a risk, but ultimately it has paid off. We actually do have, so the city and the county both have secondary internet connections. So we have 2 data centers, whether or not there's a data center downstairs and there's one out at Eaton. And so we have a set of basically the old servers that we had here, we recommissioned them out at Eaton, and there's a rack out there, and there's a secondary internet connection out there, and there's fiber between the two, so that if this place ever went away, we actually could we keep a pile of desktops downstairs, here, there, and yonder that are all basically preloaded with nothing but operating systems that we can throw out on the desktops at BEM and have 10, 15 computers going fairly quickly and reconnect those back to the resources that these folks need. And city has almost the same thing, but it's out of the airport. So the airport terminal has a secondary data center and a second internet connection. Those secondary internet connections are way cheaper than the primary internet connections, and we don't leverage those unless we have to. But so we literally have 4 internet connections between the city and the county, and the city can leverage any of those 4, and the county can leverage any of those 4 because again, we're all interconnected. So one of the big things that Ritter and Resort did for us, and that's kind of related to the radio stuff, is they allowed us to leverage their fiber optic. So when Ritter came to town, whether you do it or not, they actually ran fiber optic cable all over it. Part of the franchise agreement with the city and the county, they leveraged a lot of that fiber for us free. And so a lot of our connections between buildings, we were able to leverage for free. Unfortunately, a few of those the city and a few of those the city are not, because they don't go out that far, like the jail one, for example. But so, and we were able to get Resort Cable to run fiber out to those, and we had a franchise agreement with Resort Cable for many, many years, and then the legislation changed the law and wouldn't allow us to negotiate with them. They only had to pay us a flat percentage fee on all of the bills, and we couldn't ask for anything else over and above that. And so when the law changed, they said, well, we're not giving free connections anymore. And so we lost all that. Well, luckily, Ritter came into town almost right at the same time, and so we were able to switch from Resort to Ritter. But several of those Resort connections that we had, they transitioned from being free to being paid. The jail was really expensive, but fortunately, I think we had a 10-year commitment on that. I think we've come to 10 years, and the first 10 years, I want to say it was $2,000 a month just for the jail. And I think that was because of the 10-year commitment. Part of the 10-year commitment was funding the actual cost of Resort running the fiber optic cable out there. And so since that commitment's gone away, I think it's now in the $500 to $600 a month range. So we're going to realize significant savings in a couple areas, but we still do have some paid connections for fiber optic. But we have fiber optic cable running. City has Mountain Pine, and the water treatment plant out there has a fiber optic connection that runs all the way down there. So through Resort, so we have fiber optic connections through Resort and River all over the place. Lucky that, like I said, at a bare minimum we have that, but that's really the only 2 people in town besides 18 so.
Questions, suggestions?
Well, just one more question, just kind of bring overview. So most of what your budget items that's going to be addressed will be that transition because of the Windows 10. And then any computers that are picture live, correct?
Well, that's the transition you'll see from these folks. They're going to come to you saying, I need new computers, I need new copies of Office and so on. So you'll see them basically, I don't know how that'll be presented in their budgets. The actual IT budget that I present to you, most of it, the cost that you'll see increase will be the vulnerability software, the multi-factor software, and this virtual VMware software will be the big increase that I'm going to bring to you, propose to you, I hope. And then ultimately, the true choice not to fund that, right? And we don't have to do anything different than what we're doing. We've been successful warding off the attack so far, but it's a day away for all I know. And so these are all just efforts to try to do better, and these are all functions of what this mandated cybersecurity / audit has presented us. So that's my budget. Like I said, what's funny is so my budget goes up, but I don't spend my budget different to them. These departments spend it on their department, and so it benefits their department, but the money that you're putting in my budget is really for everybody. So this multi-factor software is not for IT. We don't even leverage it. It's for every one of these folks. And we have most of the budget that I have is that way. It's so most of the money, most of the softwares we have is for everybody else's consumption and not for my consumption or our consumption. Right? It's for the greater good.
he's been a blessing to people, you know, the people we had before. That it wasn't free.
And it's one of our
Streamlined,
suggestions,
you know, than it was.
It's great to,
I mean, it's
we
great to be able to brag that we have our own IT department and others don't. They have to outsource to people that do most everything remotely.
and our audit is, our computer audits and stuff, it's pretty much done for us. We're not trying to scramble to answer these questions that.
They don't make any sense. So,
And not to brag, this is not me, it's a team effort. Like I said, I've got some really good folks and some really smart folks that work for me, so. I don't claim to be the smartest for sure. But ultimately, it's funny, so what's David Coles? I think is he retired now? He's close to retirement, but anyhow, David Coles is the head of DIS leg audit, I believe. I don't remember exactly what his title is, but he's the one that's over all this stuff for all the counties, and he's the one I started dealing with in 2009. And he's come to a couple meetings and he's bragged on Garland County. He said, this is the one county in the state I don't have to worry about. So like I said, that makes us look good, but it also makes you all look good because you guys are the ones that made the decisions to make a change. But it's funny, yeah, when we took over, there was a machine downstairs, an AS400 that you guys, I could tell this one story, but you guys were paying this company, this one particular company, because they didn't care. Ultimately, that's the difference to me is I don't make any money off you guys, right? The city and the county, we're basically trying to just cover our costs.
Right.
You know, and they were profit driven. So anything they could get out of you, they were going to try to get out of it. And so you guys had an AS400 machine downstairs. And I think, and I'm gonna lie to you again, because that's been a long time ago now, but it was something like, I don't know, $50,000-$60,000 a year you were paying in maintenance. And the first year we were able to buy you a new AS400 for $24K outright. And then the maintenance went down to like $6K a year. And the box that we bought you was like 10 times faster, 100 times more storage, all you basically went through the roof on your capacity. But they didn't care because you guys paid the bill to IBM, and it wasn't, it was easy for them to let that just ride. And so there have been several things. Phones is another good example. At one point, I think you guys were paying $10,000 a month on phone bills. The city was too, so this is my phone rocks. But you're paying $10,000 a month for phone bills, and that, we were able to cut that cost. I think now we're paying 4 or 5 or something. And that was through changing the phone system from an AT&T system to a voice over IP internet based. Does it have issues sometimes? Sure. Okay. Ultimately, it's saved us a significant amount of money, and so we've cost you money, but like I said, in the long run, hopefully we've saved you a bunch of money too. So, but we appreciate like I said, it's funny. I thought you were going with that question a minute ago. There were times since 2009 where we had city managers and county judges that didn't get along. I thought that's where we were going with that question.
I think it's like they said, it's much better than it used to be.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. Yeah, Daryl's a blessing to work for. So like I said, and like I said, it's partnership works so well for me because you guys make it easy. You listen, and I don't have to fight anybody, and that's not always been the case on both sides. I mean, like I said, I've been with the city 34 years, and I've had people over there that I'm just trying to help you. Really, just trying to help you.
One side.
Yeah.
Sometimes helping is hard.
But right, like I said, this is as good as it's ever been. I'm just gonna say all the folks that you guys have over here and folks we have at the city have made it just a blessing to work for. I will tell everybody that I'm on the countdown, so and most of these folks know that. I'm counting in months, hopefully, but it is a couple years. But I've got a guy, for those of you that are new, there's a guy that I've been, Patrick, everybody here knows that I've been prepping, and and I don't have any doubts that I got issues, he's got issues, so he's got things to work on. We all got things to work on. So some of you know what those are, with me and others, but otherwise, he's very, very capable, extremely capable. And, him and the folks that I've got are going to come right along, and you're not going to see any difference, I hope, when if I do retire. Lord willing, it's 3 years, less than 3 years, but ultimately,
I think
Yeah,
it'd be kind of hard to find somebody issue free.
yeah. So he does, like I said, Patrick does a great job for me, so hopefully everybody feels the same way. And like I said, he's just one of us. Yeah. Yeah, I've got some really smart people over there, so they're helping you guys and the city every day, so. I'm very blessed.
We thank you for all you do. That's something I could not do at all.
Well, it's funny, so I've also told this story where I'm actually a degree mechanical engineer. And so I started my career with the city as a staff engineer in doing civil engineering work, basically for the engineering department. And the day I started, they handed me basically a big kind of almost like what you guys had in the basement, but it was called an IBM RS-6000, sorry. And this RS-6000 was to run all of the software for mapping and different engineering stuff. And they said, here, figure this out. And so that was kind of my exposure to IT. And then other things came along. But what's funny about it is that what I didn't like and would never go back to in engineering is the monotony. It's, you do the same thing, water and sewer hasn't changed. So water and sewer pipes haven't changed. You're doing the same thing over and over and over. It's just in a different spot or different, whatever. And so what I figured out real quick was that I liked when that reason I switched to IT was that the one, I tell this several times, is the one consistent thing in IT is change. So if you don't like change, don't get in IT, but that's something I love. So I'm very blessed to be, to have that gift. So works out well. Yeah. Anything else?
Anybody? All right, then we will adjourn.
Usually we're 30, 40 minutes.